If you got a tummy ache, or you don't feel right, or if you have a nasty rash, keeping you up at night, don't worry about a thing.
Don't worry.
'Cause Atticus Health will make you feel alright.
I'm Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam from the unceded lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation. Welcome back for the 45th broadcast of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. Tonight we have some exciting news for our live listeners. Thanks to our friends at Melbourne Open House, we have some double passes to Design and Death Time Immemorial to give away tonight. You and a friend could be off to an all-day program featuring panel discussions, a choice out of breakout sessions, a buffet lunch, morning and afternoon tea provided. It's being held as part of NGV Melbourne Design Week on Saturday the 1st of June at 9:30am to 4pm at the Sanctuary in Bunurong Memorial Park, Dandenong South. Held in collaboration with the Southern Metropolitan Cemeteries Trust and Melbourne Open House, Design and Death Time Immemorial invites audiences to explore the intersection of design and death as expressed at Bunurong Memorial Park. To win, simply text us your name, your email address, and what your favourite building in Melbourne is. The studio text line is 0493 213 831, and as always, please join us in the conversation with your thoughts and questions tonight. And hello as well to everyone joining us on YouTube. We are live streaming there as well as Radio Karam. As always, and I think we've got a text message that's come through already. Chloe, you are the first lucky winner of a double pass. First cab off the rank. Chloe writes, my favourite building in Melbourne is a pretty one-bedroom terrace on Coppin Avenue, and it's from the 1869 Russ Hall Park housing project, where my beloved grandmother was able to enjoy beauty, light, flowers and community and independence until the age of 98. That is amazing, Chloe. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us, and really a testament to what it means to have secure, stable housing that lets you age in place and age in your community. Wow, that's amazing. And I think my guest this evening and I will really also unpack themes and ideas of housing and how to live better. So keep texting your favourite buildings in Melbourne, listeners. We still have a couple of more double passes to give away. First one has already gone to Chloe. So my guest this evening is Moira Moss. Her diverse background spans filmmaking, law and local government in both Victoria and New South Wales. Formerly a filmmaker, Moira transitioned into the legal realm and currently serves as a lawyer at KPW Lawyers in Albury. With experience in both Victorian and New South Wales local government, including Mansfield Shire Council and the City of Port Phillip here in Vic. Moira was the Business Affairs and Planning Manager at award-winning practice Bojan Simic Architecture for 15 years. She has previously also served as an elected member on the board of Diving Victoria. Welcome to the program, Moira.
Oh my God, you went and had a look at my LinkedIn profile.
I sure did.
Oh, there's no hiding anything from you, Ilana.
No, not from me, not from the internet.
Not from the internet. That's the thing you've got to always remember. If it's on the internet, it's there forever. We have to tell all our young people, be careful what you say. It may chase you later. There you go.
But such a diverse career, and you're so creative and then really involved in shaping public life as well. But I want to move to the beginning, and I want to ask, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
Well, I believe my earliest memory, because I had it when I was a child and I remember having it as a child, so now I'm remembering memory, was Trafalgar Square in London when I was about 2.5, and all the pigeons jumping on me. So, and then obviously growing up in suburban Sydney on the lower North Shore in a place called Northbridge. It's very different to what it is now, but we had like a big backyard, and I love green grass, and we were right next to. We had a view across a valley, and it was quite nice. And the water, and the harbour, the bush. Love the bush.
And it seems that you keep coming back to the bush. That
yeah.
Where are you dialing in from tonight?
Okay, so I am dialing in. I'm normally in Tangerong country, but today I'm dialing in from Denny, which is Wamba Wamba Parepa land. And it is so true. I remember being 6 and really wanting to move to the country, but my parents stayed in Sydney, and I've had a long urban life. But finally, in my 50s, shall we say, I got the opportunity to move. It's a bright light out of the pandemic to finally move to rural living, and I really love that sense of community that you get in country towns. And I'm really loving just the views and the space and the sounds. Like I walked down to the office where I was working today, and there was a loud, raucous swarm of cockatoos overhead that was just so loud and so Australian. And, you just in the moment looking up and just going, wow, this is just delightful. And there's some brilliant architecture in old country towns like Denny, I have to say.
That's
great sense of place.
That's fantastic. What do you think pulls you back? Is it the nature and the fresh air and the sky that you're after, or more of that country community?
I think it's a little combination of both. For a while, I lived in a tiny little house in St Kilda West, and it was on a park that had a really great corner store and a little playground. And it's probably the house I've been the happiest in. It felt like a milk bar. Cowderoy's Milk Bar, for what it's worth, was like the country town hub. It could have been, one of those TV shows practically. I made so many friends. So it didn't matter that we were living in small houses or families were living in apartments. We had that sense of community, a sense of place. And I suppose that's what you get in a country town. I'm just going completely segueing into something random, but I remember a friend of my ex's coming over, and she was coming in from Europe, and she dreamed of coming to Australia, and then she'd ended up in suburbia feeling really, really lonely and wanting that density and that. And I think with a country town, you can have that sense that everybody it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, but most of the time it's a good thing that have a sense of community and a sense of place. So for me, that's what I love. And you get that in pockets of Melbourne, pockets of Sydney.
And you mentioned Tauranga country, that's in the high country, in the mountains.
Yes, that's around Mansfield. So I live between Mansfield and Balpulla.
What's it like living with such threat of bushfires as well, and the kind of experiences of climate change?
No, that's a great question. Shortly after I bought the house was the 2019 bushfires, and I remember trying to prep the house for bushfires in the smoke, and it was really scary. And I'm on one road in and one road out. And then I made a mental adjustment that I just have to ensure the place and be prepared to leave. And if it burns, it burns. Have my plan. Be practical. Don't be too attached. every year, like the last few years since, it's been pretty clear the bushfire risk is low, and just be prepared. But I think I've been helping someone with a planning matter for what it's worth on the side pro bono, where they're really struggling with getting their tiny house in the bush on a good road where they've got access to places. They're on Bell 29 past the CFA, and there seems to be like this social policy saying you can't accept that risk. You can't decide for yourself and have a plan. And like they're Bell 29, but they're building to Bell 40, and they've got a shelter, like a personal bushfire shelter. And I find that concept that, they're doing everything they can, and there's still some person going, we have a different risk appetite, and I'm working local government in risk. So I think people can still want to enjoy the bush. They want to live amongst the trees. If they make that choice and they prepare as best they can, they should. That said, I have been advocating for. I'm fascinated after the last set of 2012 bushfires. I think there were some really interesting Melbourne architects that proposed some great ideas around berm houses where you build underground, and we can't retrofit in our little community bushfire shelters. So I've been advocating for council to donate some land, and we get some grants, and we do like a berm community centre. So we have our own shelter, a bit like Timbertop. Timbertop Geelong Grammar has a really fantastic facility that's dual use, that's bushfire proof. So there's some really creative ways that you can address these risks and still enjoy life. And what we'd get out of it would also be a great sense of place and a community centre for the rest of the time. And then if there happened to be a bushfire, we came up with a design with a reflection pool out the front, so that would also work for like extinguishing embers, for example. But when it's not, it's a lovely shallow reflection pool that would also feed the wildlife, so the wildlife aren't running across the road causing car accidents to get water from the river. So we were on the stormwater line so that we could refill from there and just recycle, reuse water and use it also for a sprinkler system. Anyway, it was a fun thing that we're still advocating to do in our little community. So yeah, it's you can either be so scared that everyone cuts down all their trees and they moonscape it. Everyone has their own appetite for risk. I'm quite comfortable knowing that I will just leave early if I can, and if I can't, I've kind of got a plan. And if it fails, there's nothing I can do.
I'm always so interested to hear different perspectives and ways of living in Australia on this program, and I've spoken with colleagues who are practicing architects above the snow line in Falls Creek, and now to have a view slightly lower down the mountains. And to see those experiences. So that earth house, that bushfire shelter community facility, was that a community-driven project?
Well, the idea is to make it a community hall and be community-driven, and come under that. There's apparently, and I haven't seen it, but there is a berm or earth house. So a berm house, for those that don't know, is where it's sort of buried under the earth and the side. So you do a cutting into the side of the hill.
Like Hobbiton.
Like a hobbit house. And if you do it right, there's one, you can basically have a cool house all summer and a warm house all winter. They don't vary. There's some great examples around the world. You have a lot of fun if you've got nothing better to do on a Saturday night than scroll looking at these amazing houses, amazing design. And that's the kind of nerd that I think I really am.
I want to ask about your documentary that you were working on, Homeland Story. It's a feature documentary. And you're also involved in TV shows. Tell me what that was like.
Okay, so I went to uni out of school and got in with the wrong crowd. No, I was involved with Sydney Uni Drama Society, for anyone who's listening. It was really, really fun. So people like Robin Butler, who's well-known writer and comedian, who's done things like Upper Middle Bogan and so on. She was part of it, lots of others. And then segued into going to film school as a cinematographer. And then I worked on TV shows and did short films and travelled the world and went to film festivals and went to afters and did all of that, which was an amazing, wonderful experience. So Warwick Thornton, who a lot of people know, is, I think, Australia's greatest Indigenous filmmaker. I just, love his work. He's, gone to Cannes, he's done all sorts of things, and I've just gone blank on, I'm seeing the film with the two kids. But anyway, if anyone knows film, they'll know Warwick's work. He was in the year below me. We had a great time. Anyway, I got to make some TV shows. I did Raw. My first show was Raw FM, funny, about a community radio station run by teenagers. So that was fun. And I did an episode that was about a mad, crazy woman with an ego the size of a house that shot. So we did a spoof on Madonna's In Bed with Madonna with this crazy character. So that was really amazing because I got free reign. I shot in black and white. We really shot in black and white. We didn't just shoot in color and turn it down. It was back in the days of film, and this, for what it's worth, it was pretty advanced for television because we're talking in the 1990s, and it was she was bisexual and all of that sort of stuff. So a little bit different for mainstream TV in the 1990s. And then we did a big. So that was the first time I came to the High Country actually, and I loved it. Was coming up to do Queen Cat, Carmel and St Jude, which was a 4-part mini series for the ABC, and I directed the whole thing. It was a big undertaking, and it shot around Yea and Alexandra, and I remember driving up to Lake Eildon and seeing the drought and the little house sticking out the top. And we're shooting summer scenes in winter, and I suppose that whole design thing comes up when you're doing set designs, and we literally recreated a country farmhouse in the studio. Ben Mendelsohn was in it, and so we shot on location, and then we shot in the studio in Gordon Street, the ABC studios, and recreating a building like that and the detail. And I was talking about this with someone the other day. One of the things you do as a filmmaker is you create spaces with your designer, your set designer, and also your costume designer, so that when people are looking at the film or the TV show or whatever, they immediately can know who that person is. That's the character descriptor. The choices in the house, whatever it is, everything is thought out so that you have an idea of who this person is in their history. It's not random in any way. So that sort of attention to detail and design, and working with really great designers and doing plans just the way an architect would do a plan, set designs, but with consideration that you don't have a ceiling, you don't have a roof, and then you're replicating the lighting and all of this sort of stuff and being able to get cameras in and out. And I just loved it. It's like just the most fun ever.
It's an interesting moment in that the film values design in that way. They understand, film understands how important the building, the house, the set for what it actually is, how important it is.
Absolutely. You start with working with the designers with a color palette. And in many ways, making a film is like building a house. You have the script in the way that you have a brief, you have a story, you have an idea, you have a vision. You create your script, and then you build it and you execute it. And it's the same process that an architect would go through working with a client. You've got your idea, you've got your vision, you've got to interpret it into a set of plans, which is like the script, that you then go and construct. And at the end, you live in the vision. Film's a little bit more complicated, I suppose, because in part of that you might actually build a set, or you go in and you would look at locations. I would do location tours, and we had all sorts of disasters. Like, I don't know if any of your listeners would remember the Snake Pit. We were due to film in the Snake Pit in the 1990s, which was a bar underneath the George, and it was so cool at the time. It was the coolest bar in Melbourne, and we turned up in the morning and we only had like 10, it was tiny little bar, like a corridor, and we had 10 extras, and we turned up on the morning and the bar was undergoing renovations because the right hand hadn't told the left hand. So we had to go somewhere else. So we ended up down the road in a massive space trying to make it look small. And so it's all about the sense of illusion. And so learning about spaces it was fantastic, and plans and how it's all done, and colour and design. So it was a great training. And then I think what you want me to talk about is the documentary I worked on as a cinematographer after I'd had children. I went and did it as a pro bono. Amazing to work with Glenda Hambley, who's a great director who anyone might remember the film Fran, did film Fran. So Rotary sponsored this film that she had an idea about a homeland community when there was a lot of discussion about homelands in the 2020s. It was around the time of the Howard lockdowns and solutions, and when they had in the territory, and they also wanted everyone to be in centres. Anyway, we went out to this amazing little homeland where a group had lived on their country in Doinji uninterrupted since they basically decided to stop being nomads to maintain their link to the land. There's only like three communities like that in Australia. Apparently, they've had uninterrupted occupation of their land. And so they owned it. And with Rotary support over the years, they were able to, get to own the land. And so they then built their own houses. And I went up and worked on this documentary about how this community worked really well, because the Indigenous community was able to be empowered to have things the way it wanted, not be dictated to. So, for example, they had worked with Rotary with an architect who donated his time, which I wish I could name him, but I can't remember his name off the top of my head. And he designed their homes as they wanted them. And so the way they wanted their homes was sleeping quarters with a veranda all the way around the outside and a separate kitchen area, which was basically an open fire pit with, like those camping grills that you get in national parks in Victoria.
The swing in and out of the flame. Yeah.
There's the amount of flames and a cover over like a shed, but with a flue. So they could cook on an open fire, but be outside. And they also wanted an ablutions block separate, but they did want was a freezer and refrigeration for their food. And they had this crazy situation where for running water, they had a solar powered pump from the creek. But if it rained and it was too cloudy, there was no battery, so they had no water. So it was, Anyway, it was it's a really great documentary. It took a long time for Glenda to finish it, the story of this community. And you can find it on SBS. It's called Homeland Story. And it shows you how if you empower a group, and it also tracks the group over from the 1970s all the way through to the 20 teens, and government policy and how it flips, flops and changes and the impact. And teaching the young people to build their own workshops so they can look after themselves. So it was great. I feel like I'm talking so much, it's like a one-way.
No, not at all.
But you said to do that. So anyway, I'm just the privilege of going to be on country like that. It was life-changing. It made me think about how like people would criticize Indigenous people for litter, for example, and then I realized, well, they've only been nomadic for a few years, non-nomadic for a few years and settled. And if you were nomadic, everything is biodegradable. So if you drop something, it won't be there when you get back to the camp in a year because it's, in their traditional life. Yeah. And then they don't have rubbish services and all those things, so they have to manage it themselves. And how privileged we are that we have all of these services to look after that, and we take for granted that you just don't think about. I mean, not many people think a lot about, although it's quite topical now, but at that stage, it wasn't a big thing. So
it's amazing.
It made me think of.
I wanted to add that it's amazing that to show the story of effectively community-driven, user-driven projects and resident-driven outcomes, where people know what they want. They have their own lived experiences, their own design intelligence, their own spatial intelligence, and they can be the determinants of their own lives and future. And back then that would have been an incredibly radical idea in a way, because any government offered funded housing is completely inappropriate. So we're only finally coming now into the time of more community-driven outcomes, and even occupant and community-driven social housing projects, where public housing tenants have a shell, but then they can curate the interior walls as they're doing a St. Albans project by NMBW, for example. So that's just awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way we're getting more to that, you look at what's going on in Melbourne with what's the big one in Brunswick, the group where you have to shortlist and apply.
Oh yeah, Nightingale. Nightingale.
With Nightingale, you know, I think when people start listening and there's a real disconnect, sometimes you come across planners who are very much the market will decide, you know, in the strategic planning, they will decide. And so you get these developers who come in and do a greenfield development with no understanding of what the end user wants. It's like this, we've decided what you want. Here, pick your choices from the smorgasbord of that we're going to give you, but it's limited.
The awful smorgasbord. And
smorgasbord.
Who are we to decide or to obfuscate responsibility and give away responsibility for something that we leave behind? You know, buildings should be lasting for more than 100 years. So who are we to give up responsibility for that and say, oh, no, the market will decide? Well, as we've talked about in this project many times, that Nightingale model projects have effectively changed the market demands and the market appetite in those northern suburbs of Melbourne, and now people don't want to buy different apartments, and developers can't build their dog boxes anymore because the market won't sustain it.
Yeah, because people didn't realise they had those opportunities. You know, I had the privilege again to work with Andrew Sully and Rosso from American Rosso on an ABC documentary series that unfortunately didn't get up. And it was called The End of the Australian Dream, and it was looking at alternative ways of living, similar to Nightingale, you know, around the world. And like, we are still way behind in Australia with what some places are doing. So, you know, in Austria, they might have a community of people might come together, create house rules, and build an apartment block themselves. And they decide, we all love reading, so we're going to incorporate a library that we all share in the building, or we might all love saunas, and we'll have an extra apartment just for guests. So yes, there's 5 groups, and they do it that way. And intentional communities, or I think that we have a very set way of seeing things and thinking the market decides, and the market has decided we're going to have these horrible. I remember that song, Ticky Tacky Boxes, you know?
Yeah, little
all
boxes
in a
on
row.
the hillside.
Yeah. That's the one. You know, that seems to be like the go. And even in somewhere like Mansfield, you've got half the community going nuts because they want more Mansfield appropriate style housing, and then the other half of the community is being dictated to by developers with really horrible homes that fit the ticky-tacky boxes, and you just go, not listening. There's no listening.
I think that's why we try in this program to have these conversations about what is better living, what is better design, and try and offer some different ideas, some different considerations, some different opportunities. But how did that thinking emerge for you? How did this interest in architecture and in housing and design and housing typologies emerge?
Well, I think it's no accident I ended up marrying an architect because I did my first renovation of an apartment. I helped my brother buy an apartment in Coogee. And, you know, the family, because he was working overseas and he had some money, and the family were like, no, buy that really ugly 70s thing on the hill. And I got him to buy the really nice old place in Coogee with the view. It's now worth a mozza, lucky man. And I did my first little renovation of that. I always like being in a nice environment. It really affects my mood. And I think that is something that my ex, who I do think is an amazing architect, and one of the things that he was able to express so well is that the quality of the space really affects the quality of your living. And I think, you know, like, just if you're in a dark dog box that's got mold on the walls, it's going to impact your health. That you are in a well-designed, well-articulated space, you have a totally different experience of living. There's a joy, and it's hard to explain. Actually, I'm going to segue to something totally random, but I heard a radio show, not this one, another one, but it stuck with me. Have you ever heard of architectural psychology?
Yes. Yeah. It's similar to environmental psychology. Yeah.
Yeah. So this idea that we love to be with a view, so we can see our enemies coming because in Neanderthal times. So, and that just really resonated with me, that I think on some level, there's a lot of us that we don't realize how that's working with us. But, being able to see the horizon and the view, you can see if there's any enemy ships coming or not. And you can't, it's all calm seas, you feel good. Do you know what I mean?
How we actually evolved to respond to our environment. I think I've mentioned on the program before that it's like, why do you forget? They say that you forget why you went into the room when you passed through a doorway or a threshold, because we evolved to suddenly focus on the threat outside and not be distracted by our ideas when we left the cave. And that's why when you walk to the next room, you forgot what you were thinking about.
That is fascinating. I love it. I love that stuff. So I'm... Go.
Millennia later, we haven't changed at all, but those core basic needs of housing, of safety, of dignity, of good places to live that suit us, is so important. So I want to ask, you mentioned being in architecture, or working as not an architect, but effectively working in architecture, in the architecture industry for 15 years as business affairs and planning manager. What's it like for you being a professional that's part of the industry but not an architect?
Well, I think, like the film industry, everyone has their place. You can't do it alone. I think it's really hard to do it on your own. For example, it's just much easier for me to sell the architect's skills because I am in awe. I don't have that I have creativity, absolutely, without a doubt, but mine's slightly different. And I can speak to it and sell it, to be honest. So there's a lot of that. There's selling to get the client. But there's also
so bad at that.
Yeah, it is. And, I used to sometimes think, he just really needed to be the backroom genius guy because he was really good as a genius guy, really good designer. He could go into a site and see the opportunities and the restraints and work with them. But sometimes also they need to be slapped around the chops a little bit and told to understand that this is the client's house and there are constraints around budget and getting through the planning process that requires some compromise to the artistic vision. Not a bastardisation, but sometimes the outcome is you just do have to compromise with what you can live with. I think, it was interesting talking to clients and also understanding that for a lot of clients, if you're in residential, as you would know, this might be the most stressful, biggest project of their entire lives.
Yeah. So,
and that's it's everything for them. For you, it might be one of a series of houses, but for them, it is so stressful, it is so meaningful, it is so emotional. Home. They're forever home, and they're relinquishing control over something that they may not understand, because a lot of people don't have the ability to read plans.
That empathy is so important that professionals bring to the conversation.
Yeah, and I think that was the key for me, was understanding that and being able to give that and try and find the tools to communicate the architect's vision. I think it's got a lot easier. Now we've got walkthroughs. I mean, the ability to do a digital model and a walkthrough makes a massive difference.
And so big people plans too.
Yeah. So, they can actually see what it's going to look like when those tiles are in place. I also love doing things like helping them just go shopping for tiles or mood boards or things like that, within a scale, which is similar to the filmmaking design stuff. But I and the planning side was interesting because you're working with planners who have constraints. I did find it interesting. We did do one development where literally it went to VCAT because no one had really understood it and explained it. And I was very cross with the authority at the time, because there was an opportunity to sit down with the objectors and explain everything, but they wouldn't organise. And I think mediation and communication is key. So everyone ended up in their corners. And at the end of the process, I sat down with them and I said, now would you have been happy when we finally got it through? But would you happy to have talked to us and saved all this stress and all this time. And they said, absolutely. And in a way, it was a shame that the local authority, planning authority, didn't allow that to happen. They weren't interested in organising their own mediation. It was only if VCAT forced them to mediate. And I thought that was a missed opportunity. I also found, so we had our first VCAT on this project. Our first VCAT hearing, the member didn't want to design by condition. So he unhelpfully said, I need you to address X, Y, and Z, go away, come back. Give us another 9 months of holding costs. It was like, why didn't you just ask us in the room how we could resolve it in the room on the day? Do you know what I mean? It's just, it was that I know that we need to address this, but I don't know how, but I respect the architect. So we don't want VCAT to go around designing by condition, but why didn't you just say, can you go away, do some designs overnight that address this and come back? These are my concerns. Let the architect resolve the problem. Give them the problem. Don't try and pretend that you know the solution is. And then trying to help clients understand that, and planners, that the architect is the best person to resolve the problem. So.
I'm always really,
and I did that. Yeah.
I'm always really interested in how articulate and how clear and how much better, unfortunately, more often than not, how much better people who are aligned with the architectural profession but not architects themselves are at explaining the value of design and explaining the value of the work and explaining the value of the services. So I'm so much enjoying hearing your words and hearing you speak tonight, Moira, because it's so important, and we collectively as an industry need to all be better at that. Or it's going
that goes back to my first point, that I'm better able to sell the architect. That's what needs a team, because I'm not at stake. It's a little bit like the difference between being a director and an actor. It's really hard to be an actor. An actor has to go out and offer themselves for judgment. They're saying, do you think I was good in this film? Do you like the way I looked? You think about how you talk about actors. It's similar in a way to what an architect does. They're putting themselves out there and saying, do you like me? Do you like my work? Their work is often so entwined with their sense of identity. Then it's human to struggle. Also in our culture, we don't like tall poppies. It's, if someone goes out and they're seen as a braggart, how do you do that? It's really, I think you're criticizing architects for that in a way unfairly, because I think it's human to not be able to sell yourself. It's very, very hard to, and if you do, then you can come across as a narcissistic, whatever. I'm not swearing on this show.
It's so hard, but I mean, so are the professions, and later we'll talk about law. Like, lawyers are better at advocating for their services, and it's something our industry is in a way reckoning with how do we continue being important in the shaping of our world and our cities and our collective conversations. Otherwise, it may not be relevant. But that's what we try and do with this radio program, with these conversations, and with, I guess, all the work that architects do. It comes from a place of hope and optimism. We've just had a text message come in. Titus Shing, thank you so much. And his favourite project is a Springthorpe Memorial Park in Kew Cemetery. So Titus, you also have won double passes, and you are off to Bunurong Memorial Park to continue your favourite journey. Thank you so much for texting. And Titus, keep it coming, listeners. We have a couple more to give away. Well, I'll take that. I'll take that on board. Maybe I am unfairly criticising architects for not being better communicators. So text us in, listeners, and tell us what strategies do you have to communicate better. And I'll ask you back that question, Moira. What were some of the strategies, or what advice can you give us that you were able to bridge that gap?
Don't worry about being judged. I think that's one of the biggest problems that everyone has. Just have faith in the idea that if a client comes to you, they're there for the quality of your work. Don't compete on price because you're devaluing yourself. I do think it's tough though, because I found it was helpful to have the general conversation about the value of the intangible. I think people find it really strange to be spending money on something that is intangible. So what was helpful to talk about was the wow factor, the uplift. Because they would struggle to go, well, why am I spending, X amount on an architect when I could just go to the housing designer around the corner and spend Y. Actually, I've got a really good story about why not to do that right now, actually.
Please tell us.
I will tell you one right now. I'm dealing with in local government up here. So why would I do that? And we would say, well, go through the real estate pages and the architect design houses will sell for more, because people walk in and their experience of the architect designed house is so much better, because it will be, it's bespoke design. Absolutely. It's couture. And by being couture or bespoke design and not just off the rack, it's special, but it's perfect for place. And that's the thing, the architect takes place and marries it with a great design that meets the needs of the commissioner, and hopefully future generations. So you will get it back tenfold, without a doubt.
$11.30 said the research by Dr. Peter Reisbeck and out of the University of Melbourne, together with the Archie team. We actually are able to quantify that now. So you're quite fantastic. Spot on, just a little bit more than tenfold. $11.30 for every dollar spent on professional services fees.
All right, well, I'll give you an example of a fucker up. I said I wasn't going to swear, sorry. Where someone's gone to that really bad, the designer, and look, it's just a regional little development of storage sheds. And I'm in the fixing up the mess. And that was the other thing, funnily enough. We often were the second bite at the cherry after people had spent money on the first designer and it had gone nowhere, or they'd got a planning permit, but they couldn't actually get a building permit because the title wasn't right. And that's how I got into the law stuff. But so in this literally contentious issue that I've got at the moment, it boils down to that they used the local designer who didn't do a proper site survey beforehand with all the features in it. And it was poorly done. So they saved a penny and now they're spending £1 because it turned out there was a Telstra pit where the driveway was meant to go that was hidden and not picked up. And so now they have to move the Telstra pit out of the driveway. And it's going to be a $70,000 exercise that's on them. And I mean, that's just a little example. I mean, there are other examples that we dealt with where I've seen surveyors do title reestablishments over laneways where there's a sewer in the laneway, but it wasn't necessarily but they've gone, but that's where the title is. And so it's gone all the way through the planning stage, and then they can't obviously get a building permit because it's not, all that land that they've got on the planning permit isn't on title. And they're trying to say that they're building over a public sewer. It's just that attention to detail with the site and getting the site right, and just going through the process and being a little bit methodical, so that it's basically preparing your soil, and then you can plant your seed and it'll grow well. But so don't. But we're one of the countries in the world where you can walk into a planning department with a hand-drawn drawing and hand it in, and they'll consider it, and you're allowed to build it.
Don't skimp on advice. Don't skimp on knowledge, on that professional expert in your corner.
Yeah, it'll save you in the end. You won't know how much it saved you. You will only know if you go the other way and it stuffs up, if that makes sense.
Especially for owners for whom it's their most significant project ever. And you've had so much experience with planning from the private sector And then when you went into the public sector, into local government, we're able to, in a way, reverse that knowledge. So how has going between both worlds been for you?
Well, it was actually really interesting because I was able to take those experiences to talk with the planners in the planning department. I was actually in assets. So I was dealing with laneways in particular and roads. And as I was saying earlier, there's a whole lot of issues with people not really checking the titles and understanding that roads trump title, and it doesn't matter if it's on the title or not. I mean, we would move walls in that have been approved all the way mid-construction and say that we can tell that the road from the survey in the 1880s, it's incorrect because look at where the bluestones are. Look at the detail of the sense of place and pay attention. Don't just sort of see if you can get away with it. So it was interesting doing that training and how receptive those overworked, and planners work really hard. They do their best. They have to. The other thing is people forget they're working within the rules that they've been given in the planning scheme. And sometimes that should be changed, but they're the ones that can't do it. And as long as they're meeting the objective and they get that, you work with them, you consult with them, you collaborate with them. And that was my experience in the private sector. They'll do their absolute best. So they were really happy to have a resource that they could go to that would help them with checking that stuff. But it was a big council that had that opportunity. Smaller councils don't. So all I can say is I've seen grown male surveyors that you would never think could burst into tears when they realised that they hadn't noticed stuff and they were wrong, and lawyers as well. So a lot of lawyers don't know this stuff. Roads are a never-ending problem in Victoria, in particular because if they're often not gazetted because they're just so old, they're predatable.
Yeah, there's a historical reason for this and why we get these complicated missing bits of detail.
Yeah, there is. Like, if you look at the city of Port Phillip, it's made up of 3 former councils, and one of the councils gazetted all of its roads, one never did, and one semi-did. So you've got to look at old plans to see whether it was there. Is it a common law road? Is it a private road that became a public road over time? All of these considerations. Like, when people talk about private roads, well, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but there used to be a lot of private roads in the city of Melbourne, and they've realised that they're all public roads. The only private road left is the RACV road because it's got a gate over it. And it's on public land, whereas all the others are used without obstruction by the public, without force. So over time, they become a common law road. So they need to be built to the standards. So planning authorities getting that understanding was great because they're good people. They really do their best. They're not the enemy. Work with them. But they're trying to think of future generations. And as I said, what I'd like to see more of, and I really try to encourage, is more collaboration with trying to resolve the issues and more compromise around what can you live with, because there's no point things dragging on at VCAT, which they do a lot.
Yeah, for years, sometimes for years at the moment. It doesn't help. So this is like very smooth segue into how you've found yourself in law at the moment.
Oh, yes, well, obviously you do a lot of planning law when you're running an architectural practice and you're doing planning. And I would do a lot of the case management, and I was admitted and I had my degree, which I did before I became a filmmaker, straight from school, but never actually practiced as a lawyer. And then I started helping, a friend asked me about doing some title work ahead of her renovation in St Kilda, where she had a title that had a big chunk missing out of it that had always been within her fence line. So I sorted that out, and word got around I was doing quite a lot in St Kilda, and then I ended up at a meeting at Port Phillip and got hired, and then doing more and more of this sort of legal work, and I've kept working in local government. And then funny enough, I met a woman in a dog park in Deniliquin and she's a really fantastic woman. And we just had that amazing conversation occasionally you do, where it was like, she's looking for people, and I'd love to have that opportunity. And I just think, why not go and do something new? Keep reinventing. And I'm still filmmaking, still writing, still doing my own stuff. But, I also, I just like doing something different. And so she's given me that opportunity. So that's kind of fun. But in the meantime, I'm still working inside an organization, trying to help her sort out these mistakes. Like, we've got a classic one I will tell you about, because I can do it without naming anyone or any place. But in the 1970s, subdivision done, sewer put in, joint sewer, private line, all good. Fast forward, 2019, subdivisions done, all good. All the records show where it is, dial before you dig, everything's good. And in New South Wales, the councils are the water authorities. And then we get to the beginning of 2024, they go to do the sewer connection, they realise sewer isn't where it's meant to be, sewer line. It's actually running right across this new block of land where someone's trying to build their house. And so the question is, what do we do? Because it's actually between neighbours, but it happened in the 70s. Did someone move it? It was obviously a rogue plumber and a builder just decided it was an easier answer to the problem. Now negotiating and sorting that out and trying to make it work for everyone. That's sort of what we do. We don't have to. We don't have any liability. It's not our fault, but it's like, well, the plumber and the builder aren't around now 50 years later. That's that reminder that the mistakes of today do come up somewhere down the track. They'll show up.
Wow. And it takes a keen eye and a bit of investigation to find them, and an experience. I've loved hearing your story tonight, Moira, and hearing how many different yet interconnecting and always relevant career opportunities you've had. So we wish you all the very best in this next adventure, this next step.
Thank you.
Or this new step forward. And I'm mindful of the time, so we'll ask my last question. And that's, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? I'm feeling very hopeful at the moment. I think I've learned to trust, and by just living in the moment. And if you live in the moment, hope is always there, because you're not predicting anything. You're not catastrophizing. It's like, hope's the opposite. I had a great cinematography lecturer who said, you want to talk about light? Let's talk about darkness. You only notice light when it is dark. So I suppose, my hope is always there now. I have hope that we're getting better over time. Things will be, I have lots of hope. I don't know how to describe. How do you describe hope? Come on, I'm going to throw it back at you. What's your hope?
No one's ever done that before. What gives me hope? I think it's just the constant belief that there's always a solution. There's always a solution to a design problem, interpersonal problem. That there's always a way that the human spirit can make the right decision, can innovate, and there's always a will. Rather, where there's a will, there's a way. And
I love that. The human spirit always prevails. That's it. There's always a solution.
I think as an architect, you have to have that. you have to have that optimism. But I'd encourage everyone to bring that to our public life and our public conversations. And quite fitting in the ideas of reinvention, listeners, you've got just a couple of more minutes to text us if you would like a double pass to attend that amazing program from Melbourne Open House and Melbourne NGV Design Week. Fantastic, because this will be a pause on the giveaways. Maybe we'll have some more next week, but come and claim them now and plan your amazing itinerary for Melbourne Design Week. There is so much happening, so much out and about. No doubt you might even catch some of those projects when you're next in Melbourne, Moira. But I thank you so much for joining me this evening and for this conversation.
Right, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of radio architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hi, I'm Dr. Floyd Gomes, aka Atticus Health with Dr. Floyd, you might recall, and it's great to be here at Radio Karim.